Right, folks, are we ready to start? It's 7-Eleven, not the name of the shop that me and Richard used to go to in Barry, which was never open. Did you ever go to the 7-Eleven in Barry, Richard? Bloody nightmare. Anyway, Bill, Henry, let's see if you've got anything you want to say.
No news from this end.
Yeah, this guy put some money in my bank account earlier on. Apparently was for fondling my sheep. I don't need any money for fondling my sheep. Right, any news from you, Richard? He's not saying anything now. Bill, what about you? Apparently you've been to Exeter to see the Heaver Tree stone used in the construction of Exeter.
I did. I sent you some photos, Carl. You got them, did you?
Yes, I did. I was not impressed with the shower of you in the shower naked, you're taking a selfie, but I just put that to being you, Bill.
Well, I wasn't impressed with your nonsensical reply. Totally illogical. What's that all about?
I can't remember what the reply was.
I sent you the pictures, and your reply was, I enjoyed playing young Sherlock. I had a lot of experience, this and that. That's fucking rubbish.
I used to remember you all on the road because used to be like walking around town with a swagger. Oh, yeah. And you're like,
oh. That's at the bottom of my. That's like a signature thing. Above that, I would have had the words lush.
That's it, is it? That was it, was it?
Yeah. No, I sent you another reply, but I don't think you've had it.
No, it was. It was identical to the first one.
Hang on a minute. Let me have a look at my messages here. I can have said Bill.
Right, I'm watching the rugby at the moment. I'll do that. You know, well, let me just.
Bill.
Oh.
I sent you a link. I sent you a link to the Gaia video I did. Bill.
What?
Right. Okay. I sent you a link there on my phone. I sent you a link. You're supposed to press on the link and you're supposed to watch the video.
Carry on then.
Bill.
What?
Anyway, they were good photographs, Bill. Thank you very much.
Okay.
and we're gonna crack on. So over to me, folks. So apparently Goff is with us today because Henry upset him last week, but nevertheless, that's fine. What we're going to do this week is we're going to build up to next week, right?
Do that?
And the reason why that is that there'll be some original research next week about the Caligula Roman invasion of Britain. I kid you not, right? What? What's going on? Right, we've got a few things I want us to look at today, including maybe a lost province of the Roman world in Africa, right? So that is precisely where we're going to go first. And I do understand that you'll all probably say that you want us to be finished at 9 o'clock. So I know that.
Is everyone else having problems with the link?
And we'll have a little look at a couple of images that Bill took whilst wandering around Exeter. So that'll be good. So let's move on.
Hello, folks. Has something gone wrong?
Hi, Henry. I can hear you.
Well, that's good. So we can talk.
We can.
We got rid of the annoying person.
We have.
Hold on. He was sounding as though he was talking from a baked bean can.
Well, he's talking from his Iron Age hat, isn't he? I think. So, yeah, that may have an effect. Oh, well.
Shall we phone him up and find out what's going on?
No, he knows there's a break in the transmission. What's the rugby you ask on?
What's the score going to be on Saturday?
Oh, well, Wales are not going to win. Let's hope for a spirited performance, and the difference will be 20 points. Or less. We'll see.
See who else is playing.
Rugby's a strange game. I don't know why I bother to watch it, but I do.
Fixtures on Saturday. Right, Scotland are going to have an interesting trip to Italy.
Oh yeah, there's one tomorrow night, isn't it? And usually on a Thursday, France and in Paris against Ireland.
I think that is, yep. I think the French will do that. To be honest, the Irish team have gone off the boil.
It'll be France or England again this year.
Yeah. I think Ireland's going through a reshaping.
Yeah, they have. They're slightly reorganising now, aren't they?
Right, I'm back with it.
You need to buy a better link.
Listen,
Hang on, I'm back.
You're frozen.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Just.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
New thingamajig and the best money can afford. I don't know what's happened. Can you hear me?
Can hear you. Yes.
I might be able to transfer the voice. 1 second. You can hear me.
We can hear you, but your face is frozen.
Right. Okay.
Your face
Let's
is
get
moving.
started. Right. Who cares about my face? Right. Okay. What I'm going to do. We're going to do that. And we're going to do this. 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 And hopefully we're back again. Right, good. Right, so before we start, Bill had a few adventures, right? And there we go. So, Bill, did you manage to walk all the way around Exeter and its wall?
No, I didn't. Just the West Gate and up to onto the South Gate and the medieval wall.
Bill?
Maybe a third of it, maybe.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
This is just working. So obviously, what we've got there, that's the stone that we're looking at, right? So really good stonework, and this is what I was mentioning to actually look out for.
What stonework?
So
I can't say any stonework.
we're gonna crack on with what we're meant to be doing tonight, and we're gonna have a look at Africa. You can have images. Right, can anyone see these? I don't know what's going on tonight.
No.
Right. Is anyone seeing the images?
Yeah. You're what?
Anyone seeing that?
We got two of you. Oh, and you're gone.
So grandparents, Italian.
Oh, yeah.
Culturally, it's been fantastic childhood growing up.
Yeah, it was good for the food.
Yeah, I bet. I bet.
I think growing up mixed race is probably one of the biggest things that I'm grateful for because
Whoa.
it's special. And I think I bonded with my siblings.
Henry, can you see this?
Probably growing up.
I
not
can't.
working.
You're
Turn
not
the TV off
displaying
in the
anything. I
background.
can see Richard and I can see Bill, but not anything else.
Australian enough to be Australian, Scottish enough to be Scottish.
Right. Okay.
You know, but
Who's got the television on?
Right. First things first. Whoever's got the television on, we need to reduce that sound. Right. Okay. So you can't see the image.
No.
No. Just your name, your email address.
Right. Okay. Right. All right. Well, there is one way around this, but it means that all the stuff I've got to teach her is on one thing, and right, okay. Right, okay. I've just got to try and sort this out. So, bear with me a sec. Right. Okay. Right. Okay. Bear with me. Okay. I do have another thing that I can use. I just got to try and work how to get there. Right, here we go. Okay. Right. All right. Let's just trans. Yeah, and also I don't have enough charge in this thing either. Right. Okay. 1 second. Phone's not charged at all. 1 sec, guys.
Get my plug off the car.
You're gonna have to charge your phone. Right. Okay. Don't know what's happened with this. Completely wrong. Mm.
You have to go to Barry to do it on Tuesday.
Right. Right. Okay, folks. I'm gonna get back to it now. Right. We're transferring over to my phone.
Right.
I'll be on in a sec. It's broken. It's not charging. Shit. This is not really going well. Right, guys, I'm nearly there. Okay, right. All right, we got power. I transferring to the
Post.
mobile. I got the images on it, so 1. Go. The images on. Can you hear me now?
Yes, but you're a bit muffled.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So I've moved from the piece of equipment that cost £2,000 to a piece of equipment that cost £300. Bloody great. Right.
Was that tax
Okay, so
deductible?
we're going to get started. Oh. What's that? Right. Okay. So hopefully you'll be able to see the images now. By the way, don't get me started on taxes. I pay taxes on stamps. I pay taxes on fuel. I pay taxes on bread. I pay taxes on absolutely everything. I pay taxes on Zoom. I pay taxes on my phone contract. There's even tax on prostitutes. So there we go. Well, the ones in Wales there is anyway. Right. Let's look at these images. So one of the questions I was asking is, or was there a province in Africa, right? And by the way, I've just transferred over to the wrong device. Oh my God, it's the wrong. Oh no, I've wrong thing completely. Great. Oh, flip it out. Right. Okay. We're going to try something else. That's not going to work. No, that don't work. Right. Wrong thing. Right. We'll give it another go. One last try. Right. We'll go back on here. We'll go there. Right. And we'll go there. We'll read that. We'll stop from there. Stop from that. Right. Okay. Now. Okay. Is that working?
Yes.
Good. Because that was where I started. Right. So there's obviously there was some kind of glitch at the beginning, right? I don't know what it was, right? Something happened. Richard went, I went, and when we came back, everything seemed to work. So one of the questions that I was asking in the week, when you look at the map of Northern Africa as part of the Roman Empire, roughly around the end of the reign of Emperor Trajan in AD 117. What you do see in North Africa is a load of red or purple or whatever the map is coloured, right? And then you've got Egypt. And you think, well, is there anything beyond that line, which is known as the lines, which is the Roman frontier, right? And when you start looking into it, there's more to North Africa in the Roman world than meets the eye. And that's exactly what I wanted to look at. And that's where we're going to go today. One of the I contacted Cirencester Museum about some mosaics that have now been brought back from the British Museum to be displayed in Cirencester, right? Which we're going to do next week, because the lady that is now the director of the museum, Emma, used to do some work for us. So she sent me a really nice link, and she's invited us to a conference as well in the museum. Well, I've got a link for it. So that's what we'll be looking at next week. And one of the things that I did mention, and sorry about all this stuff, because one of the things I did mention it was something along the lines of what I'm doing next week. The Roman invasion of Britain under the leadership of Caligula. I know it sounds nuts, but I'll be doing some real research for all that for next week. So what I wanted to do today is look at this lost province in Africa on top of the existing Roman province in Africa. And we've got some really nice images. Now, another reason why I'm doing this is because when you look at how Julius Caesar saw Britain, and how the Romans saw Britain after the reign of Claudius. They could have quite easily have said that they rule the whole of the main island of Britain, even though they don't have a military presence, because the Romans were good at doing that. They said they conquered an area when in fact a big chunk of it, none of the Romans ever set foot. And a big story about that is North Africa. So there's the link. So I asked the question, could a lost province of the Roman Empire be found under the sands of Africa? It's not a lost province because the Romans did record that they've got provinces in North Africa. But what I'm really interested in is where the roads lead from those provinces into the Sahara Desert. And slowly but surely, what we are finding are cities, forts, towns that are occasionally being uncovered by those swallowing up sands of the Sahara Desert. And this, for example, is no such exception. So when we think about the Roman world, you can see something like this. And most of the stuff there in modern day Tunisia is where the old kingdom of Carthage once existed. And we start to think about Mauritania, we start to think about Morocco, right? And actually we go a bit further onto the other side of the map and we've got Egypt. And this really intrigues me. It really intrigues me that there is more to North Africa than meets the eye. So one of the things that you can see on this map are these roads leading south, right? And these are associated with an empire which name that you may never have come across, called the Garamantis Empire. And this is a territory that may have at one point been conquered by the Roman world. That simply means that most of the maps of Africa should be a lot bigger in regards to the Roman Empire. So when we think about North Africa, we think about Mauritania. We think about the likes of Egyptus, which is over on the right. We think about this this main province in here, Africa Proconsularis. But with many things with North Africa, lots of events have caused the Sahara Desert to 1 minute be there and the next minute is to be lush and green. And this is not fantasy. So these core imperial territories that you can see in front of us are to be seen as the controlled zones of the Roman Empire. But many people who have actually studied ancient Rome, the Romans are said to have controlled Germanica at one point, are said to have controlled northern Scotland at one point, are said to have controlled big tracts of Saudi Arabia. But physically, the Roman Empire did not have the manpower to control all of this. Is there a missing province? There's probably missing bits of a province. And this is where I went. And when you look at these maps, they do alter. And you think, well, there's so much to know about Africa. There really, really is. Now, if you look at the map there, you can see a dotted line, which is just above the words of Guy Tooley. Now, there's something there known as the limes. Basically, the limes, Limes, is the name given for Roman frontiers, which was thousands of miles long, all the way from Hadrian's Wall, all the way through to the Rhine and down the Danube, all the way to the Black Sea, back into the Parthian world and so on. That's known as the lands that limes are basically, there was a defensive work. And whenever you do look at the Roman Empire, occasionally you can find maps that the Romans controlled a big chunk of Arabia, which isn't shown on this map. So we can't always be sure that where the Romans owned and controlled is the same throughout history. Most of Roman history is not recorded. Most of Roman history has been lost. The documents that do survive are copies from copies, and particularly in regards to maps. So that little place there, known as the people of the Garamane city, or the Garamantes, and Garama is a part of southern Libya today. This may be a territory that none of you have ever come across, and it may have actually been a territory that the Romans did actually conquer at one point. The reason why we're doing this now is, as I said at the beginning, is very much linked with how we interpret Julius Caesar in regards to his conquests of Britain. And I'll be telling you something else next week. Whenever I'm looking at Julius Caesar and I'm looking at Julius Caesar's conquests of Britain, I always miss out the date 56 BC. It might be likely that Julius Caesar may have set foot in Britain in 56 BC, but it was so unsuccessful that he decided to wipe it away from his own annals. We do know that the Romans and the province of Egypt was the grain basket of the Roman Empire. And I'm so reminded that ancient Egypt was a lot lusher then than it is today. When we think about forts beyond the word Canari and beyond the word Gaiatuli and into the territory of the Gamantes, there are lost forts which are slowly being found. There are roadways that go on for hundreds of miles, apparently leading nowhere. But nobody builds roads leading nowhere. They always lead to somewhere. And we think of that when we think about the likes of the Inca, and we think about the roads to El Dorado, and we think about the lost roads of the Incan Empire that seemingly go somewhere, but we haven't actually found the endings yet. And in many ways, we can say this about the Roman world. One of the things that, as you all know, I'm really fascinated in is the Romans in Scotland. We see similarly in Scotland that we see lengths of roads that just end or may go somewhere. We see forts and villas, all sorts of things in the most northerly part of Scotland. And why? And the reason why is because Roman civilization once got there. But one thing that we can say about this whole story is that within the Sahara Desert, and there we go, it's a good example. Within the Sahara Desert, we can see that there are forts 1 minute, and then within decades, they're swallowed up by the sand completely. Towns completely swallowed up by sand. Roads completely erased from the surface of the world because they've been covered in sand. We're slowly starting to study these landscapes, and what we are starting to find is modern day aerial photography, modern day LiDAR, modern day technology is helping us cut through the sands to understand this lost world. And last night I joked and I basically said, just think, 2,500 tanks were lost by Rommel's army in Africa. In 1,000 years' time, you might find a tank deposited in a Roman city and have both been lost in time. And suddenly the sand has blown away. And it's seemingly you've got a contemporary tank for a Roman city that's 3,000 years old. And you can think about that, and you think about these things will happen, and they do happen from time to time. So one of the things that I mentioned last night is forensic archaeology. Now, Bill went to Exeter, and I showed you the images at the beginning. And in Exeter, there's very little of the great Roman city surviving. But forensic archaeology tells us that the one type of stone that was quarried, the heather tree stone that was quarried in Exeter, right, which is used in the Roman wall, is an indication enough that the Romans were actually in Exeter. And forensically, this is important. When you look out the deserts of Libya and Tunisia and Mauritania, you see things like this. And you can remember these types of structures from films that were being made that we watched when we were children, like Beaugest, where former Roman cities were sort of used as backdrops for Hollywood, or reconstructions of similar used in Hollywood itself, but based on this type of landscape. And the reason why I mention this is that even in those films of Beaugest and the French Foreign Legion, it sees that the Libya and that landscape of the French Foreign Legion is actually bleak. However, when these towns and walls are actually being created, the landscape was lush. And how do I know that? These are mud bricks, right? And you find these types of things just sticking out the sand, and you're thinking, well, hang on a minute, if they're mud bricks, there's no mud brick around at this minute. There's just sand. The only way you can make mud brick is by using mud and water. So that indicates that where this is made, constructed 2,000 years ago, the landscape was once very rich. So the archaeology tells us by the actual mud brick that the landscape was once rich by the remains that are left behind. To construct something like this, you need trees, you need scaffolding, you need roof membranes, you need all these things to construct this landscape, which is not there today. But by the existence of the very archaeology, forensically, that tells us that this landscape was once lush. We can go down the avenue, oh, there's buildings here, therefore people live there. But it was always like this. Wrong, wrong, wrong. That's always the wrong assumption. And lots of archaeologists make that assumption. They find these forts and they think, oh, they find these towns and they think, oh, it's always been like this. They brought the mud brick in. And they brought the timber in hundreds of miles from down the road, and they brought all their food in, and they brought barrels of water down the road to get down here. Absolute nonsense. The only reason people would live here is because this landscape was once rich. It's beaming of archaeology. If we take another landscape and we think about Iraq and we think about the Arch of Ctesiphon. I've done several videos on the Arch of Ctesiphon. The Arch of Ctesiphon is constructed using mud brick, right? And you look at the landscape and it's just barren, it's bleak. Okay, same scenario. You could only make mud brick walls, right, like this, if it was once a lush landscape. And also forensically, this is stone. This is another locality within that sort of lost landscape of the Sahara and on the borders and bounds of that. You can only build stone structures like this if you've got wooden timbers for the roof. You can only build stone structures like this if you've got access to quarries. You can't find the quarries anymore because they're covered in sand. So forensically looking at this tells us a great deal about the landscape without even thinking anymore. The obvious is that you're only able to see this landscape. For example, south of Tripoli, today on the Lime frontier, going into the sort of sands of the Sahara, the Western Sahara. Again, looking at something like this. So what I'm doing, I'm challenging the age old, right? And the age old is this is here. It always looked like this, but they built this, and then it became too much for them, and they abandoned it and moved away, right? Well, they didn't build these things in empty deserts. They built these things because the landscape was once rich. It was an agricultural landscape. You don't build these things without an agricultural landscape to be able to feed the landscape, right, that you're living in. And this isn't what we look at is we look at the year 3,500 years ago, and we look at Akhenaten, right? We look at Akhenaten and Akhetaten, and we just look at that city. And one thing that we can't understand about that city is it was once built in a rich landscape that after 20 to 30 years, it was so exhausted that they abandoned the city. And we see this time and time again. We see civilization, and then we think about the Nazca people as well. Once the Nazca people lived where those Nazca lines are in a rich landscape. We know that there was water. We know the ojos in the ground, which collected water when it did rain. It was a very rich landscape. But suddenly, those landscapes, for example, with the Nazca in Chile, it is in Chile, isn't it? The Nazca people 1,000 years ago abandoned the landscape because things changed. And this is what's happening with these landscapes. One minute they're rich, and the next minute they're not. That's what we're saying. That's fact. That is fact. And so this word, the limes that I've mentioned, and I'm so pleased that you can hear me now. I don't know what happened earlier on. So the Roman limes. Now, when we think about the Roman limes represents the frontier line of the Roman Empire at its peak, roughly around AD 117. And I wish these dumb, stupid people who would stop putting second century and all that nonsense. It's really old hat. And AD in that on the screen is actually wrong. The AD should become before the dates. Anyway, sorry, there's my rant. So these Roman lines extended over 5,000 kilometers from basically the Hadrian's Wall or the Antonine Wall, the Gascridge, all the way through the Rhine, all the way through to the Germanic frontier, Danube down there. We're talking about the Black Sea, wandering all the way through to sort of Holy Land as it is now. They're through, through the eastern part of Anatolia and all the rest of it, going down, and then you get into Saudi Arabia, and then you get into Egypt, and then you shoot across all the way through to the Canary Islands, right? So that's that 5,000 kilometer frontier. So if you extended that again and you included the Canaries all the way through to Great Britain, you can imagine that the circumference of the Roman Empire is a lot more than 5,000 kilometers, right? So what we're talking about is that lots of people have established that the limes in Africa, in northern Africa, was the maximum frontier where the Roman world went, right? But it wasn't. We've got loads of things south of that, and the one point I want to gesticulate there is that when we get the limes along the Rhine and associated with the Danube further on down to Romania, the Roman Empire always extended beyond that. Really always extended beyond that. So we can see that. Some of the great sort of Roman remains are to be found in Germany, for example, but they're beyond the limes. So this is the thing. So when you look at the Roman Empire as enclosed by this defensive landscape, you're not seeing all of the Roman Empire, right? For example, when you this is the story. Bill's been with me to Hadrian's Wall, and I keep saying, Hadrian's Wall is just a customs post, and you got the Antonine Wall, and further north you got the Gascridge. It's there's so much beyond these frontiers, so much beyond the built walls, the ditches, the forts, the fortresses, the watchtowers, and civilian dwellings. There's more. Some elements of these limes and the lines of the landscape being excavated, reconstructed, and destroyed, particularly in the Second World War involving Germany. Right. So again, this is one of the great villa sites in Mauritania, and there's another site which is a lot better preserved than this one. But anyway, so when we're looking at buildings like this, we're thinking, right, okay, what is a Roman villa? And you're thinking, well, Roman villas weren't just put in the middle of nowhere in sand. It just didn't happen, right? Roman villas are a key commercial projection of the Roman world, right? So the Roman villa itself was the hub, the place where goods went to, right? And if goods went here, it would mean that the landscape was green and lush, right? Meaning that it was surrounded by little mini settlements, and all the goods were actually bought here. They were bought to this locality, taxation and all the rest of it. So one quote that one writer's got here Oh God, and I can't work out the person's name. But it says Rome beyond the map, the empire under the sands. Really good point. There's books being written about that, and we're really starting to go beyond the map to understand Rome. So this is the thing. Using my Tim Ingold stuff in my head, which I did with the University of Highlands and Islands, it's looking beyond what we know and understand, right? So I'm going to do something. I'm doing something very daring next week, and I've told you, intimating. Um, Julius Caesar compared to Caligula. There's more evidence to say that Caligula invaded than Julius Caesar, than Claudius, than any of the Rome anyone. You know, there's more evidence to say that Caligula invaded than any of them, but it's said that he didn't. Right. So I've got to try and get the evidence to prove that to you next week, and I know where it is. Right, and I'm going to show that to you next week. Right. So I'm going beyond. As we've got, what I'm doing next week is I'm using this as an example now. Next week, what we're doing, we're going beyond the map. You know, that's what we're doing, right? And we're going to look at the invasion of 56 BC next week, right? And one thing I was having a chat with one of my class members on a Tuesday. That was this morning. I said if you remove the writing associated with the Roman emperors and leaders coming to Britain, right, you're left with nothing. But when you look at Caligula, you've got something, right? So this is the thing. This is the thing. This is what we've got to do, right? And in the Sahara, you've got stuff under the Sahara. Very, very important that. And this is where we're going. So now these people are very, very important. And this empire, these people that you may never have come across, the Garamantes people. Now, these Garamantes people, yeah, let's show you where they are again. Let's go back onto the map. Let's just hang on a minute. Let's just go there. There we go, the Garamantes. There we go on the map. There it is, Libya. Love it. Let's go back to my text. Let's just scroll through. Let's just go back to my text. There it is. There, the Garamantes people. Right. So if nobody's ever come across these people, don't surprise me. There's lots of tribal people. There's lots of kingdoms that exist that have been lost in time. Right. So when these people's libraries have been taken over and lost forever, right, all we're left with is the victors, like Rome. So the Garamantes people themselves, what kind of civilization would it take to establish the first desert settlements? And we look at the Garamantes people. Now, southern Libya, 3,000 years ago, these people commanded a prosperous empire all the way through to the time that these people were taken over by the Islamic hordes by AD 700. And then they made their way all the way through North Africa and managed to get the Moors managed to get to Spain, blah, blah, blah. Right. And there's a point with that. There's a real key point, right? The reason why Islam was able to conquer Africa so quickly is because more of Africa existed accessible by roads, towns, and cities. Because if there weren't all these roads, towns, and cities in a much more than North Africa than we can see actually on a Roman map, right, Islam would have never got a foothold, and that's a fact. But we don't look at these facts. We ignore what's going on. We think, oh, Islam's just going across Africa. There's nothing there, and it just ended up somewhere. They're dying on the way, but somehow they're surviving. They're going into Spain, right? But that's not reality, right? So they're conquering Egypt. This is Islam. So what we see with Islam is that by about 640, after 20 years, Islam is really starting to kick off. By about AD 700, it's well and truly in Africa, and it's conquered Egypt, right? Going back to the Gamantes, for example, they must have been quite an amazing people, but their entire civilization, practically everything, is lost under the sands of Libya. Amazing. Whole world. And there might be whole worlds underneath all of that as well, whose time sign legacy on history has been completely lost, right? So again, the Gamantes, often untold story of these people, another forgotten civilization from antiquity. And we know about the Gamantes people. They were actually quite learned. They were knowledgeable. And it's likely that lots of their knowledge ended up with the scholars of Islam. And that ended up in lots of the libraries and stuff that was established by the Islamic faith by the Moors in Spain. Because as some of you know, Islam by about 1,000 about 1,000 and 1,100 or something like that, 1100 AD. We're seeing that they've got lots of these libraries. Where are they getting all that information from? Lost worlds like the Gamantes, for example, maybe. So again, look at this massive world. It's huge, isn't it? So if they can be lost in history with a little bit of a mention by Rome, right? It could be quite possible that there are other worlds that were part of the Roman Empire that we don't have the foggiest. We don't have any knowledge about them at all, right? Because all that's been lost. We think we're very naive when we look at the Roman world. We're very naive. We might have Strabo, we might have Pliny, we might have Cassius Dio. We might have Tacitus. We might have even Julius Caesar. We might have all these writers, right? But Livy, great guy. But the one thing is that we think that we know about the Roman world from these writers. But these writers have left us probably 1% of all the writing of the writers from the ancient world of Rome. So that means that 99% of the Roman world history has been lost. It's probably more like 0.99 has been lost, but we'll give it to 1%. So the Gamantes beyond the map, we know that they engineered a desert system. Now, to try and get an idea of their desert system, we find mileposts going into the Libyan desert, going with names of cities that we haven't found yet, right? Amazing stuff. Michelle's always stopping the car now and just leaping out and watching these mileposts in West Wales and seeing what's written on them. At least we know where those places are now. We don't know where these places are from the Roman period in Libya. And over on the side of the map, there's the Nabateans. Now, the Nabatean world was eventually conquered by Rome a little bit before AD 100. We'll come to that date again in the future. And the Nabateans were great water engineers, desert system engineers, right? So all of this stuff is really, really important, a sort of insight into understanding Rome beyond the map. So somebody said last night, they shouted out, they said, "Oh, do you know how many oases there are in the Sahara?" And I said, "I don't know." They said there's 750, right? And I thought, oh, that's a lot. And when you think about something like this, you think, well, back in the day there were thousands of oases, right? And there must have been to actually supply and to actually add to the power of the kingdom of the Gamantes. So all of this stuff is absolutely fascinating, right? And there's a writer, if anyone wants to look him up, he's a guy called David Mattingly, work that I used to come across when I was at the University of Leicester. He's University of Leicester Don. And University of Leicester, I didn't know this at the time, but I do know now. The University of Leicester has done a lot of study into lost civilizations in North Africa, including the Gamantes. Strangely enough, I wish I'd known back then, because the University of Leicester is a big Roman university. So why are they studying stuff in North Africa? They're studying stuff in North Africa because they're linked to the Romans. Silly me. So what they're doing, they're surveying, documenting extensive settlements using LiDAR, they're finding now huge underground water systems, right? These are not scattered nomads. They've got an organized urban mini empire, right? Compared to Rome, it's mini. Very big though. And engineered agriculture. So when we just think back to the Roman period 2,000 years ago, having it a little bit wetter, right, means that the Sahara Desert isn't in control as it is today. However, what they're starting to do, what the Chinese are starting to do with the Mongolian government, is they're actually starting to reclaim large tracts of Mongolia from steppe land, barren, sandy, endless landscapes, and they're actually replanting it with trees. And what they're doing with the Sahara is they're getting they're starting to create. They're putting sandbags on sand, right? And they're creating small squares, right? And they're building it with soil and putting some seed in there, right? So that roots gets into the sand and it starts to grow. And they're creating little squares everywhere, and they're starting to recolonize the Sahara on top of the Sahara with this new technique that is really, really working, right? So clusters of the world, clusters of archaeology, we're hunting beyond the Roman Empire. And this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing when I'm looking at Britain, right? But I needed to give you another anchor, another sense of seeing something from another Roman point of view, or not a Roman point of view, because we've got little mentions by the Romans, right? But not enough, right? We know there's something there. And what about a little bit south of Caesarea is where it is, where it's got Crete and Caesarea there. Not Caesarea, that's wrong. That's over on the right. Cyrenaica, sorry, Caesarea is somewhere completely different. So Crete and Cyrenaica. So when we think about the south of there, right, what's going on there? You know, what is going on there? And we're looking over at Mauritania. Now, there's a clue about Mauritania. We know that going back 2,300 years ago, there was the Mauritanian Empire, right, which was set up in opposition to the Carthaginians, right, and their empire was a lot bigger than what's there now, right, but that was taken over by the sand. It was clammed and grabbed by the sand. So there's so much more to be seen. There's so much more to be understood. And we might just be talking about the Comanches, but there's other worlds as well. So the people who would become the Comanches are thought to have descended from the Berber tribes. And now this is interesting. This is really interesting point. With strong links to the Sahara pastoralists found further south across the Sahara. Pastoral living is characterized by adaptation to the land and its produce, dependent on animal produce and herded cattle. Animal husbandry, humans, movement of animals. The one point with that, I know if I'm a flock of 20 sheep, right? I can't have decent fleeces in the summer, in the spring, right, when we shear them, if they haven't had a decent diet, right? It just falls off them and they fall ill, right? We know that. It's the same with cattle, right? You can't get milk out of cows, right, unless they've got something to eat, right? Cows can't just drink. They've got to have grass to graze. They've got to have all sorts of stuff to nibble. They're not just nibbling grass. The cattle are nibbling various different foliage. And that was across the Comanches world for them to be pastoralists in the first place. So by thinking about these and the Romans saying about they were great pastoralists, they could only be great pastoralists, as we've already mentioned. So it's a frontier zone. It's a frontier kingdoms, like all the way around the Roman world, right? There's one kingdom that was never part of the Roman world, the Parthians, right? The Persians were never ever part of the Roman world. I think we'd be burnt to death if we ever mentioned that, right? So the people who couldn't ever be claimed to be part of the Roman world were the people in the east, you know, the Parthians, the Persians, never. But the Germanic people were sometimes claimed by the Romans, and obviously, so was everybody in Scotland claimed by the Romans. Let's not go far as Orkney and Shetland, Bill. Right, that's quite a dodgy one, right? So in looking at this, in sort of understanding what we've just said, and sort of the bit of a takeaway from this, and this is telling us a story of Rome's power outside Rome. And Rome's power did not end at the map edge. We think it did, but it never did. Never ever did. We look at things like this and we think, right, hang on a minute, this is part of something much bigger. It's part of a city, you know, it's part of something much, much bigger. And we think about this, and we look at these other images, and we think about the mausolea, right? Hang on a minute, right? Mausolea alongside roads. There's nothing else, right? It's made of stone. Okay, stones come from somewhere, right? So why would you have mausolea in the middle of the desert? It must indicate that there was a city, right? And the people were incredibly wealthy. Well, you don't have wealth out of sand. You can don't know these aren't sand dealers, okay? These are dealing in cattle. These are dealing in sort of grain. You know, these are doing. You can only do that if you've got a rich landscape that's been engineered or was already like that. The engineering is just to put a little bit of extra nutrients and stuff on the landscape, as we see with the flooding of the River Nile. So these roads, the evidence of trade routes, Rome beyond the map was real, and Africa preserves it better than anywhere else. And there's so much to learn. The one thing about learning this and understanding this tells us more about Julius Caesar's invasion and, in brackets, Caligula's invasion and Claudius's invasion than meets the eye. There's can an empire exist without formal borders? Yes. Is controlling water more powerful than controlling land? Well, the Comanches seem to think so. Should we redefine what a province means in Roman terms? Definitely. A province in Roman terms was a lot more than the province that you're seeing on a map. End of. And how much Roman Africa remains undiscovered? Probably about 2/3 of it. Whole cities, whole landscapes. And we're occasionally, now and then, we're finding big mastabases in Egypt. A mastabas is basically the forerunner for Cheops, great sort of pyramid at Giza, right? The three of them, right? And we're still finding these, 20, 30 meters tall, right? But they're hidden in the sand. So, if that can get lost in Egypt, these can get lost quite easily, right? And what we do by looking at the architecture, and again, stone and so on, are very rich tombs. And having the ability to do this, quarry, movement, roads, and so on. Again, by looking at carvings, we're sort of indicating that might indicate that there's plant life, flowers. We've got various type of fauna in the shape of birds. We've got palm trees. Well, there's no palm trees there today, right? And again, this being carved in a monument tells us so much more than it is there today to understand the lost world beyond the map of Northern Africa. And even when we look at sites which are closer to the sea in Libya, right, it looks quite barren, quite bleak. I just want to tell you a little bit of a personal story. No, well, I can tell you a bit of a personal story, right? I never told anyone this in a public meeting like this. Some of you already know that I was meant to be working in a Baghdad museum in 2003, right? I had we were getting a license for me to go over there. I was meant to be working in a Baghdad museum, and we illegally invaded Baghdad. We looted and pillaged the Baghdad museum. I would have ended up dead, right? But at the same time, we were in communication with Libya, and we were invited to actually work in Libya in one of the museums. And it's a shame I didn't go. I'm so pleased I didn't go to Iraq, but that's another story, right? And Henry, when Henry jokes about certain things with me via text, Henry, it's a little bit more serious than you think. Henry knows what I'm talking about. So one of the points with this is back to my granddad's story from my story, right? I didn't end up working Libya for other reasons, and well, I was caught up in the Baghdad stuff for a start and so on, but that's another day. When my granddad, he was he eventually went to serve in Burma, right? And he was an aircraft fitter, and he was following the retreat of Rommel's army, and his remaining 30 tanks of 2,500 tanks from Al Alamein all the way to Tunisia, right? And they eventually got to Tunisia, and he took a photograph of the Tunisian amphitheater. It's a bit better than preservation of the Colosseum in Rome, but not as tall, right? Perfect, right? And I'm reminded of all the towns and cities and archaeological remains that soldiers collected by taking photographs of them, right? Which are no longer there today. Because what may have been visible in the Second World War, by the first time people have got cameras and they're out taking photographs of these things, it would be great to get hold of those photographs to understand archaeological sites that are no longer there in Africa because they're hidden under the sand. And you're thinking, well, you've got a photograph from somebody in, the Desert Rats, for example, with Montgomery, and you're just thinking, well, there would have been a direct advance route. And the soldiers wouldn't have gone off the advance route, and the places that they were taking photographs of would probably be traced, which are no longer visible because they're covered in sand. And I think that'd be really interesting aspect that maybe somebody's done or maybe they haven't, right? So again, these mysteries in Africa telling us more about our own story than actually really meets the eye. So when we look at a more sort of complicated map here, Tripoli in the northwest, right? You're looking at all those sort of place names in Arabic, and you're thinking, Leptis Magna, that's one of the big famous sites, and you're looking at all of this, right? And you're thinking, well, what's going on, right? This red line indicates what we know of the defensive line, the limes, right? And look at this thing sticking out there. It just don't make sense. So between sort of the right hand side and the left hand side, there's probably a big chunk of places, right, that are not recorded on this map, right? And again, this is part of that story, that bigger story of understanding this lost world, this lost province, and understanding that you don't find these things in desert conditions for no reason at all. And this is one of the big things that I don't get, right? And Bill, I'd like you to maybe discuss this with me when we go to questions, right? The one thing that I don't get, right, is that when you get like people talking about the Arch of Ctesiphon in Iraq, it's in the middle of the desert, right? And nobody really talks about why it's there, right? The city of Ctesiphon was starting to fall into disrepair by about AD 800 and so on. It's completely abandoned, right? The people think, there's a city there in the desert. Well, why don't people discuss it's the city that wasn't in the desert at one stage, and that's why it's there, right? This is exactly what we're talking about Africa. We're talking about Leptis Magna, this huge city, right? That by all intents and purposes was part of a very rich landscape, right? And a clue to understanding what I'm talking about in a lot more understanding is that when we look at, for example, I've got a photograph of it, but when we think about how Carthage was completely destroyed, and the date is not going to escape me. The year is 146 BC, when Carthage was destroyed so thoroughly, right, that they salted the landscape in and around Carthage to stop anything growing. They covered it with sea salt and whatever. That would clearly indicate one thing by those very actions. The landscape around Carthage was so lush, they had to stop it being lush, right? And again, it tells us more that Africa was completely different 2,000 years ago than it is today. So we've got to halfway, but unfortunately, if we're going to finish at 9 tonight, we're going to have a 10-minute break, but we'll have a few questions, right? And I don't know how you're doing with the rugby, but is Wales winning?
No, that's next Saturday, Carl. It was just a preliminary, that's all. No, I didn't realize there was so much in North Africa. Obviously, Leptis Magna and a few places in Tunisia. But Rome goes and establishes to get something, okay? Obviously, we know in Egypt it was the breadbasket for Rome, so that was the reason they went there. Why would they establish all these towns and forts, etc., along South Africa? There were no minerals there, such, or was there? What were they after? Not just the glory of conquest. There must have been something they were after all along the coast.
So I'll interrupt there. So the Guermantes people themselves were talking about, the Romans said that they were great pastoralists, right? We know that they were a great civilization, but other than the Romans mentioning them, and you've got posts and sort of lost towns and cities there and roadways, right? Other than that, we don't know much more. But the point is that you can't have great cities in the middle of nowhere without agriculture. It's not. Bill. It's just not possible, right? And I think the misapprehension that we've got of history, right, is borne down by those films that we've seen when we were children, right? So we see films like Gordon of Khartoum, and it's surrounded in desert. Well, there was the grain harvest that was collected from around Khartoum, right? Which was in the grain silos in Khartoum, which was where the Mahdi wanted to capture in the first place, right? But we don't see that in the film, Bill, right? What we see is desert, right? And one thing that gets really confusing is that when we watched Tarzan and the Apes, and that you know that great runner, wasn't it, from 1937, and we see Africa and there's green trees everywhere. It just started to screw with my head, because I used to think that Africa was just sand, and suddenly we're in jungles in the middle of nowhere, right? So it's easy for me to fall into a trap that maybe you don't know that you've just set up, right? The trap that you may have just set up, which you didn't deliberately set up, is we've got all the goods coming from the south. We've got trade links going from the south to the north and all the rest of it, right? And it was still desert, and all the goods were coming back and forth through trade, right? But civilization doesn't work like that, right? There is trade going from the south to the north, but in the meantime, those people have to be fed, right? So there was a green landscape. So I'm saying that you didn't trick me then, but it could have been edged that way. And somebody could argue, actually, Carl, you're completely wrong in everything that you've said. You didn't really need these cities surrounded by water and irrigation. It was brought to those cities, which is absolute nonsense.
Okay,
right?
so the area was obviously, all the cities and everything else was self-sustaining, because they were growing their own crops, their own corn, etc.
Yes.
That's the first
Yes,
thing.
they
And
were.
trade as well.
Yes, they were. They were.
Trade is the missing factor, I think. Yeah, they
The
would have come
trade-
far and wide to trade, wouldn't they? Yes.
Trade is a missing factor. And also there's another point with this. This links us back to Britain, right? When it's only recently that we've actually started to take aerial photographs north of the Antonine Wall, and we've started to realize that the north of the Antonine Wall, the Iron Age people weren't surrounded in woodland and forest in Scotland. They were surrounded in rich agricultural landscape, which were tenanted by square blocks of land and tracts of land, which were managed, right? And we've seen that. We had a lecture on that, and it's only new. But before that, we would argue that nobody really lived in Scotland other than the forests, and it was quite a bleak, barren place, and the Romans wouldn't really want to step foot there, which is absolute nonsense. Again, that's beyond the limes, that's beyond the border. And what we have done is we've assimilated this evidence from elsewhere to not to fit, to make it understandable, right? I think so much of history is written by taking a little bit of information and just leaving it there. So what I'm saying, if we go to the Bronze Age, right, we talk about trade between the Iberian Peninsula and Ireland, for example, right, and we just say it's just about copper, but it's more than just copper. You can't eat copper, right? And you can't procreate with, you need all these things, and this is what's going on. And what we see is the bleakness we see we what we do we see all those films which, and what's happening is lots of these films are being filmed in Hollywood, right, which is, you know, the sandy deserts, right? And then they're saying this is what Africa was like in the Roman period. Nonsense. One of the great epics which we all love is Life of Brian, the Monty Python team. It was a great thing, absolutely great, and that was actually filmed in Africa, right? But there's one problem with Life of Brian that is the epitome of everything I've said, right? Palestine was not those endless deserts of nothing as portrayed in the Life of Brian, right? It was lush in Palestine, right? And it's just that our history is blinkered and interpreted by what we've seen, which is wrong.
Okay.
Anything else, Bill?
I've got a better understanding of that now. But with Carthage out of the way and Egypt conquered, it would have been, am I right in saying, relatively easy then to proceed from Egypt westward to conquer? There's no real opposition to stop them building towns and cities, etc. Would that be true? Or was there more opposition?
It's completely true, but wrong at the same time, right? Because we have the Berber people of Africa, and we've got the tribal raids, which we're hearing a lot about in Roman texts, right? But then that doesn't make sense when you've got this big empire south of, well, when I say big empire, it's fairly sizable. You know, it's pretty big world. Of the Gamantes people in southern Libya. What we are talking about, we've got warlike Libyans, we've got more warlike Mauritanians, and the Mauritanians existed as their own empire at the time of Carthage. So when Carthage fell in 146 BC, the Romans used the Mauritanians as allies to suffocate the Carthaginians, and then the Romans turned on the Mauritanians, right? And then they go over to Morocco, right? So what's happening is the Romans are pushing this way over to the east. It's going to, mind you, Bill, you are right. It's going to take 100 years for them to conquer Egypt, because they don't conquer Egypt until 30 years BC, right? So, you know, you got another 130 years after Carthage, right? So, but then you've got Carthage, and then Carthage defeated, Egypt defeated them. It's roughly around 30 years BC that then they push from Egypt and they meet through Libya. But they do have opposition, but not as much as they had before.
The last question then, all this, when all this was going on, there must have been local historians. Would they have recorded who was there? Battles, journeys, blah, blah, blah. Is that in the record anywhere or not?
No, it's not. It's nowhere, Bill. It's nowhere, Bill. But as these cities are being uncovered, right? All we need is a library, right? Now, the one difference between the Carthaginian Empire and those empires that existed south of the Limes in Africa, right? The Carthaginian Empire was on the coast. The Romans obliterated it. They burnt the libraries. They destroyed the evidence. But even then, the Carthaginians, we've got a historian. We've got several writers that did survive this Carthaginian eradication, right? What happened to the Gamantes people is that the Romans traded with them. They may have had it as an autonomous region of Rome at one point. They may have conquered bits of it, but they wouldn't have conquered all of it. And what we're seeing is that there may be libraries which were completely overtaken by the sand. And one thing you can't do, Bill, is eat books. So that would be something that would just be left behind. And
who knows? Some of these records might have been destroyed when Alexandria, the library there, was destroyed. Yeah. Food for thought.
We won't go down the avenue that the Muslims burnt the Library of Alexandria, because the Muslims wouldn't come until 620, and the library had already been set alight by the Christians before that. But I see your point. But there is one point with this. There is one point. We get two factions of Islam, not the Sunni or Shia, not that nonsense today, but we get two factions of Islam. One, an educational faction of Islam, like the Moors, who would have taken this knowledge and used it, right? And there's the other faction that wants to destroy knowledge, and we got the likes of ISIS and so on. But the one thing that we don't have is any of the documents of the Gamantes people surviving And that tells us that the libraries were lost, but they
Yeah,
might still be
yeah.
there.
Yeah. Okay, I'll shut up now, Carl. I've taken the time.
Michelle's showing me a tea bag or a coffee. I'll have a tea. We'll have tea. We'll order tea. But I don't know what the hell happened at the beginning. Then it was an absolute frigging nightmare. But we're doing something good now. Dick, anything you want to say before I have my break?
He's muted.
All right, Dick. I want to play with Michelle for
Hey.
10 minutes. Right, Henry. Anything you want to say?
I know Richard's back in.
Dick, do you want to say anything about anything?
Oh, very interesting.
I was going to say let's play with Dick, but I don't think that was appropriate. Henry, I'm not going to ask you if you want to play with Dick. Anything you want to say?
I've sent you something.
Oh, not a photograph of something obscene.
No, it's a link. Basically showing basically Roman Empire expeditions is one of them I'm looking at the moment, and they get down.
That's going to be perfect for next week.
They get down to Lake Chad and Senegal. So you're talking about thousands of miles from the Mediterranean.
You know, I hate to be right, but sometimes I can nail this. Do you know what? I'm getting really good at this, right? I got this. You know that I write the column for the local newspaper, and sometimes Richard helps me with it. And the other week I said that there was a building that I dated to 1890, right? And somebody wrote in and said you're 1 year out. It was 1889, and I thought, oh, that's fine. But when you're looking at something like this and you've got a hunch, and lots of my hunches about the Romans are smack on, and you've actually kicked the ball, and you're winning a game that I haven't even played yet, Henry, which we're going to do next week.
Yeah, so I think they've got they've found traces of artifacts along those routes.
Lush!
So I think you are talking thousands of miles that they've literally penetrated, and they're documented.
No, good. We'll do that next week anyway. So what we're going to do now, guys, we're going to have a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 8:39, and I got to roll around on the bed with one of my sheep.
Right.
I'll be back.
I'll be back.
I'll be back.
I'll be back. I will be back. I will be back. Oh, dear. Loadle. Oops. Oh, dear. Well,
Noise.
Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Yeah. Ah. Oh. Oh. Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. It's gone now. Gone, 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 gone. It's gone.
I don't think the drugs work anymore, Bill.
Hey, where are you? You back away? Hang on.
What? Oh yeah, we're smack on. Yeah, the drugs don't work, Bill.
What, have you lost you, have you?
What?
You've lost you? Can't see you.
Oh, I'm still here, man. I'm just floating on the wave, man.
Okay, well, float over the internet then and show us your face. There we are.
There you go, man.
There we are. Meanwhile, back in Rome.
I'm thinking about getting a new companion in the car with me, Bill, a blow-up rubber doll.
Oh, we had one of those a long time ago, didn't we? As I remember.
Yeah, the police ended up calling the neighbours ended up calling the police on me because I tried to burn it in the garden and they thought I was burning a body.
Didn't someone take one on one of our trips?
Yes, they did.
Oh, don't go. No, don't.
Who was that?
Oh,
I think I know.
and all the girls in the pretend class brought along. One brought a suspender belt. One brought some stockings, knickers, bra, and we dressed her up and put it in the back of the car.
Yeah, the good old days.
Oh, right. Anyway, that's the story for another day. Right. So the next bit, I've got to try and do the next bit. Because I've got to try and do the next bit as consistently as I possibly can, because we're going to need it for next week. So let's see what I can do with this. Right. So okay, here we go, and here's my stuff. Let's get on to it. Rich has eaten a donut from John's Hot Bed Shop.
The banana, no?
He's on to the bananas, yeah. Okay. Richard said the next time he sees me, he's going to take me for a McDonald's.
You're not listening.
No, I know he's not. He don't care. Right. Okay. Here we go. So let's see where we are now. Right now, I had all of these things to do, right? Which I'm not going to have time to do, but I am going to start off with as follows, right? So, I have been meaning to discuss the works that look at Julius Caesar's invasion of Britain, right? And then I need to look at Ebbsfleet and Pegwell Bay with an update on the archaeological evidence there. So this is a translation from 1869 looking at the Gallic and Belgic wars. According to Julius Caesar, this is translated from Latin in 1869, the Deo Bello Gallico war. So these refer to the Britain passages. Now, we don't look at the passages relating to the invasion, yes or no, of 56 BC. We look at these passages involving the invasion of 55 and 54 BC. Right. So I'm going to promptly move through these a little bit quicker than I did last night. So Book 4, Chapter 20 of his Bello Gallicia War. In that chapter 20, Caesar having learned these things from prisoners and having discovered the nature of the country, Britain, and what harbours were suitable for landing, Pegwell Bay, thought that the time was now come to make the attempt. But before he ventured to do so, he determined to get some information respecting the island, its inhabitants, their customs, and the nature of the country. For this purpose, he sent Caius Volusenus with a galley to reconnoiter. Now, when we look at this next week, there's something else about the story, but we've got to do this now. So, Book 4, Chapter 21, Volusenus, this great marine Roman with a couple of boats, after exploring the coast for 5 days, returned to Caesar and reported what he had seen. Meanwhile, Julius Caesar, having resolved to transport his army to Britain, collected ships from all quarters and assembled about 80 transports, which he thought sufficient to carry 2 legions. To these, he added some ships of war. Now, these are 80 transports, right? Remember the figure 80. Right. Book 4. This is it. This is invasion 55 BC. The one that actually did take place, in his own words. Chapter 22, Book 4. The Britons, when they discovered the intention of Julius Caesar, sent ambassadors to him to promise hostages and obedience. Caesar encouraged them and exhorting them to remain firm in their purpose, receive their ambassadors courteously and dismiss them. Right, there's really something really important in this bit of the chapter 22, right? How the hell did the Britons know he was coming if he had never been here before in 56 BC? Why would they have any knowledge that Julius Caesar's on his way, right? Why would the Britons send in ambassadors if they weren't well aware of Julius Caesar and the Romans? Now, this is a real big clue to what we'll be discussing next week, right? So remember that. Don't need to discuss it today. Book 4, chapter 23. Having delayed some days by reason of unfavorable winds, he weighed anchor about the third watch, and after proceeding about 7 miles, found the cliffs crowded with the armed forces of the enemy. Now, excuse me, folks, right? How the hell did they know he was coming? How the hell did they know to be repaired? How the hell did they know what type of enemy Julius Caesar was? Where's all this stuff coming from? There's something missing in the history that we're not told about in school. Anyway, chapter 24, book 4. Here we go again. So the enemy perceived the design of the Romans. How? How did they know that the Romans were going to bring cavalry? And so they sent out their own cavalry and charioteers, who were accustomed to fight in that manner, and the rest of their forces followed close behind and endeavored to prevent our men from landing, the Romans from landing. You wouldn't send cavalry and charioteers unless you knew that the Romans were bringing cavalry themselves. Chapter 25, book 4. This was a difficult matter. On account of the size of the ships, the depth of the sea, and the firmness of the enemy, our soldiers, unused to this kind of warfare, well, mind my French, that's crap, because Julius Caesar had been campaigning in Gaul for a couple of years up until this point, 3 years, by the way. And also, most of the troops on board those vessels were actually Marines. They were used to fighting at sea. So what's that about? With their hands encumbered, they're talking about sort of pilums and sword, gladius and shields and so on, were obliged at the same moment to jump from the ships, stand firm in the waves and fight with the enemy. Nice. This is chapter 26. At length, when Julius Caesar perceived that the men hesitated, he ordered the ships of war to be moved aside, a little aside from the transports, and placed opposite the enemy, and used his engines and slingers to drive them from their position. Now, just excuse me a minute, right? 1 minute, Julius Caesar's saying they're not used to this type of warfare, and the next minute, they've got a naval presence that's equal to affect a naval victory. Yes, a naval victory with all the weapons that he required. You know, there's things that don't add up. Again, more about that next week. Book 4, chapter 27. Encouraged by this, the soldiers leapt boldly from the ships and engaged the enemy. The Britons, unable to withstand the onslaught, it should be, onset, fled in all directions. Chapter 29. Now, chapter 28 isn't there because it was related to something else. So chapter 29. The Britons renewed the engagement with their cavalry and chariots, in which kind of warfare they possessed great skill, and they succeeded in killing some of our men. Now, the one thing about this, are we talking about somewhere else on the British coast? Because the Isle of Thanet was hills, and how would you get chariots over to the Isle of Thanet? Because there was a big race of water in between. You know, could this have been further, you know, westward? But we're not told that it is, because Julius Caesar doesn't tell us, right? Whew. Anyway, we've loads of chapters are gone because he's talking about other stuff. So here we go, book 4, chapter 36. After these things, Caesar thought it best, for many reasons, to lead back his army to Gaul, especially the equinox was approaching and the sea is stormy in those parts. So in other words, it didn't last long. And second invasion next week. Right, we're going to go on to something else now. We're going to go on to the Ebbsfleet archaeological evidence. Now, I want you to give me. I want us to finish a little bit later tonight because we started a little bit late because we had shenanigans. I've got 20 minutes to get through this, and I want to get through it. And Richard, if you can hang on just 10 more minutes tonight, I'd really appreciate that. Right. So anyway, now we had a naval expert last night who was able to explain this a little bit better. But In short, this is all based on research work by Leicester University again. Sorry, it may sound biased, but lots of this is from Leicester University. And it took 12 hours, right, to head from northern France, right, south of Calais, and it took them 12 hours to from the 4th of July to the 5th of July to get to Pegwell Bay. And this is in 54 BC, right? This isn't in 55 BC, this is 54 BC, right? If you want to look at that chart quickly, it's basically saying, at 8 o'clock, right? So at 8 o'clock, we're going out to sea. It sets sail, right? So you've got 4 hours before midnight, right? So I'm saying 12 hours because the vessels rest. So about midnight, the wind falls, fleet cannot maintain its course and is carried on too far by the tide. At sunrise, Britain is sighted left afar on the port side, and this is at 4 o'clock in the morning, right? So, okay. Fleet follows the turn of the tide, so there's a little bit of a delay. This is okay. If you want to work out the maths there, it's 16 hours, but I think last night we estimated 12 hours of sort of sailing because they were sort of set at that point. I think that's what we looked at. Strove by rowing to make that part of the island where there was the best place of disembarkation, so they could get off the boats. About midday, fleet reaches the shores of Britain. Job done, right? So you can argue whether that's 12 hours or 16 hours or whatever. But the point is, right, the point is with all of this is that somehow he gets to Pegwell Bay, right? We've already done this. We've looked at this, but there's some really important stuff. And the really important stuff is to sort of I've got a load of other gubbins here which I'm just going to read through quickly, right? So what we're told, the first invasion on the 23rd of August 55 BC involved 10,000 soldiers, right? And we're talking about lots of reconnaissance of the British Isles was already known, right? In 54 BC is where we're at now with the Roman army, right? Now, Mandrabracus, this is something else we don't discuss enough. Between 55 and 54 BC, Mandrabracus, who's an ally of the Romans, right? Who had met Julius Caesar the year before, right? Fled to France and basically said to Julius Caesar, "Can you come over, right, and sort out all these horrible people who don't like me, right?" And this is why Julius Caesar invaded in 54 BC. And this new stuff is really important. It really, really is, right? And this is a little bit more than we looked at the Ebbs Fleet excavations before, right? So what we're looking at is we're looking at a plan, right? Oh, and by the way, right, this reconstruction of a Roman galley can't be correct, right? Because if you've got an army in this galley, right, how are they going to get out? How are they going to get that's 10 meters up from the keel, right? It's huge. They're just going to drown anyway. So this reconstruction was provided for this today, but if this is a Roman galley, how are you going to get an army off this? Anyway, long story, we'll move on. But the thing that I want to show you, right, is a plan, right? We'll go back to this in a minute. This is the plan, right? So between 2010 and 2007, right, there was lots of archaeological work. And along this corridor here, they were building a relief road, right, onto the Isle of Thanet, right? And the red stuff is the ditch. And if you add up that it could be roughly rectangular, right? But the area that this surrounds is 20 hectares. And Bill, the area that this ditch is meant to have surrounded as a rectangle is the same scale as the area at Maiden Castle, which you and I walked hand in hand that time, right? So we're talking about this is 50 acres in area, this fort, which would have been big enough, right, for the Roman soldiers that Julius Caesar was bringing over, right? And all of this all of this ties in with the notes that I'm just about to show you, right? So the University of Leicester, led by Dr. Fitzpatrick, don't know the guy, identified a ditch roughly from about 50 years BC. He's using that first century thing nonsense as well. But anyway, about 50 years BC, defensive ditch at Pegwell Bay, which is actually marked by there it is, Ebbsfleet Peninsula, Pegwell Bay. That's exactly what we're talking about. You see the race of water, the Wantam Channel. That would have been similar to when there was a sound or a race between mainland Barry and Barry Island back before 1884. Treacherous at the best of times. Anyway, back to that. Back to this. So we're talking about, this is the site of where the large defensive works were associated with Julius Caesar's invasion in 54 BC. One really interesting thing is a really nice piece of archaeological evidence. As they were excavating, hang on, let's get that bloody plan up. As they were excavating, they found out that this was a previous site of an Iron Age settlement, right? Which is what the Romans would typically do. They would go to an area, right, that had previously been occupied by people, right? And they chucked them all the way off this landscape, right? And then this is relatively near the sea at this point, right? Now it's 1 kilometer away from the coast, right? A ditch was dug. That ditch itself was 5 meters wide. They found bits of Roman ironwork in it, including a pilum, right? Including the bodkin of a pilum, right? And this is really key, right? A pilum in the bottom of the ditch. Now, some more information. So Ebbsfleet, the Isle of Thanet, overlooking Pegwell Bay. The site is considered the first and currently only evidence of Julius Caesar's landing in Britain. This is key to what we're talking about next week, by the way. A large defensive ditch, likely part of a Roman fort, a temporary Roman fort used for a very short period of time. It says that the design resembled Roman defenses at Lycée in France. I don't agree, because it's got a flat bottom, right? The defenses at Lycée had sharp V-shaped, but this one doesn't, look flat. But anyway, long story short, it says they found the remains of a broken pilum, which is basically a Roman spear in the ditch. Well, that's not enough evidence, but they found other bits of Roman material in there as well, right? And the context is that it had been a previous Iron Age site. The Iron Age people didn't go back there, and it's now 1 kilometer away from the sea, right? So we got all that stuff, right? So that there, where the road is, that's basically where the shore was, right? Now it's a kilometer away, and that's the ditch that they're excavating. So after the work in 2010 to look at the site, get a little bit of information, Oxford and Wessex Archaeology, they first identified the ditch. So they went there when they were widening the road, and lo and behold, here's the ditch, which we've shown you before. Now, I'm gonna get straight to the chase here, because I want to discuss something that should be in my notes here. If I can get to them quickly. They're not in those notes, they're my other notes. So the last time we looked at this, one of the people said, oh, they found the remains of 2 individuals in that ditch. And the answer is yes, they did find the remains of 2 individuals in that ditch, right? Which I'm going to go to my other notes. I'm just trying to find my notes quickly. Ebbsfleet skeletons, got it. So the bodies that they found in the ditch, I can't show you images of bits of bone, but you'll get an idea, right? Now, this is key, really interesting, right? Now, we've got the Roman military stuff, which I'll show you in a minute, right? Well, one of them anyway, right? So bits of 2 individual found in this ditch, right? And it's clearly flat, isn't it? Any V in it? No. So this is a temporary thing, right? You probably used for a month. And that's it. And then the Romans went. So biological profile, right? Some of the remains that they found of the one person, skeleton 1, right? The individual was between 25 and 35 years old. It don't mean anything. However, the individual was radiocarbon dated to approximately in the 50s BC. So that person's remains are accurate to the date that we're talking about. And the fill that was found radiocarbon dated to date when those bones ended up in the ditch, right? So it ended up in the primary fill of the ditch. So basically what we feel is that the ditch wasn't deliberately filled and it was just abandoned. And over time, because we've got water grooves and stuff to show that stuff is washed in here, right? The human remains, which are very slight, but they are human remains, right? They're not associated with a burial. There's no grave goods, and it's a casual disposal. So in other words, the body was just chucked in there and just left, right? And what is that? Skeleton 2. The other skeleton 2 is of an adult, roughly around 20 years old. Now the radiocarbon dates from a little bit before 50 years BC, maybe a little bit after, right? But the middle date, the radiocarbon date, is roughly around 50 years BC. Deposition. The body itself and the bones indicate that the body was washed into the ditch later on by natural erosion and flooding on this landscape, right? So the body wasn't put in there by humans, it just washed in there, indicates that the whole landscape had been abandoned, reinforcing that both sets of human remains may have been involved with some kind of conflict, right? And one of the bones actually had cut marks on it, right? Which is absolutely amazing and fascinating. So the skeletons themselves, so in other words, let's just do a review. Skeleton 1, an adult male, radiocarbon dated roughly around 50 years BC, the date that we're talking about, was found unceremoniously deposited within the film, supporting interpretation of the feature as a short-lived military earthwork, not used again. Now, I want to find in my notes, because I got a little bit more in my notes about these bones, which if I can find them, where is it? I can tell you full well that one set of human remains has cut marks in it, right? Which is really, really important. Bodies just basically dumped on the landscape. And I think this is really, really interesting and significant. So what we're going to do now, we're going to move on to my other notes again. So don't worry, guys, we're on time. So let's just go back to my notes. And so what they've done with this landscape, they've got 2 trenches that they've excavated. And what they're feeling and looking is that this is an extensive site, a really big extensive site. As I say, 50 acres in area. The ditch is 2 meters deep, and for something that was enclosed in an area of 50 acres is substantial. Me and Bill knows how big 50 acres is, because if you start at the entrance of Maiden Castle and go around the top of it, it takes you 10 minutes to walk around the whole thing, 1 kilometer, right? It's a big area. So it enclosed something big. There's no evidence of any post-Iron Age. This was a temporary site, right? So what we know with the trench is that it was slowly infilled with debris that was rain washed into the ditch, and we can tell that. Now, what I'm going to show you is this object. This is known as a pilum head, and anyone knows what a pilum? Basically, that's the end there. Basically, what you do, you would charge the pilum, and you would when I say charge the pilum, these pilums would rain in the air, right, down on the enemy, right. There's a pilum, right. I would say you would fire the pilum, you'd launch it with your hand, right, and the end of that would lodge in the shield and weigh the shield down, and you couldn't throw it back, right. That was the whole point of the pilum. So you had a very hardy piece of metal one end, a wooden shaft, and this was a soft metal, right, and that's evidenced in the archaeological evidence, and that's a pilum head, right. We don't often find lots of these. But this is fairly intact, so it's probably never used. They abandoned it for whatever reason, right? that itself is 10 centimeters long. It is quite a chunky piece of archaeological evidence. So they found other iron objects in the ditch, really badly corroded iron objects. And oh yeah, I've got more information on the bones. Sorry, I thought they were in my notes, but they're in the published notes, right? So the bones themselves, one of them was fragments of a skull. We've got a humerus, one of the arm bones, and we got a femur leg bone, which would and the femur of the other individual, the other skeleton, has got a sharp gash in the bone caused by a sharp blade, sword blade. So we're getting this really interesting stuff. We're getting these odd objects that we really can't understand what's going on. They're all in this ditch, and again, the Romans didn't hang around to backfill it; they just left it, and no Iron Age people went back to fill it either because it was just too big. It was just like the trenches after the First World War. Half of them were left, and then, after a while, they just backfilled and collapsed, and all the rest of it. So this is key now. What I'm about to say leads us to next week is this chart, right? There's a few things that don't make sense. The first expedition in 55 BC, right, had 80 ships. This expedition, not 10,000 men, required 800 ships. Rubbish, isn't it, Bill? It required 800 ships to carry 20,000 men to Britain and their horses and their supplies and 2,000 cavalry, right? They used 800 ships, right? And the reason why I'm making a fuss over 800 ships, it doesn't sound plausible. And the reason why it doesn't sound plausible is the only person who got ready a navy to invade Britain was Caligula in the year AD 40. He had harbours, ports, he had a leisurely place, supply depots. Caligula set these up. Caesar had none of this. Where the hell is he going to find 800 ships from, right? Okay, this is what we're saying. So what's happening, right, is that we've got somehow if we go back to the other chart, this was explained to me last night, right? The vessels, because of the 20-degree camber of the sea, right? You're only going to be able to see the tops of the cliffs, okay? And at Ramsgate, right? And this was described to me last night, right? So with that, they were able to see the tops of the cliffs at Ramsgate, right? Not Pegwell Bay. And they headed to the Isle of Thanet, right? And that's how they eventually landed at Pegwell Bay, right? It's said that he planned to go to Pegwell Bay, right? It was likely he may have been heading to Dover, right? Julius Caesar would have been well aware of this gubbins here. All the white stuff is actually at high tide, and most tides is going to be inundated in water, right? It's a really stupid place to have an army trapped on the Isle of Thanet, right? What we're going to do, what we're going to do, Richard, right? We're going to land, right? The Norman army in 1090 on Barry Island, right? How are we going to get the horses and everything off Barry Island if we're going to land there? It doesn't make any sense. But apparently this is where Julius Caesar landed. And this is what the evidence that we have is at Pegwell Bay. So the curvature of the earth means that a sailor in a small boat some way out to sea would have only been able to see Ramsgate. And that's why we're heading towards Ramsgate. And eventually we're going to see Pegwell Bay. But again, 800 vessels. And it's staggering that that's basically 22, 23 men per vessel, right? What? Where's he going to get them from, right? The thing is with all of this, right, is that some experts still believe he actually didn't land at Pegwell Bay at all. So that means that Pegwell Bay is involved with another invasion. And I'm not going to say Caligula because that's not where I'm going next week, right? However, the point is with all of this is that the record sort of tells us with the other notes, right, that he headed towards Canterbury, right? Well, you've got to move 2,000 cavalry across this mud, right? Being based at Ebbsfleet with your navy, you've got to move 20,000 men. Well, leave about 2 or 3 back to manage the vessels and all the rest of it. Then get to Canterbury, defeat the native people, and then charge all the way back across the Wonsum Sands, going back to Ebbsfleet, and within a month you're leaving, right? So all of this is speculation. And finally today, what we're going to say, finally today, because I know Richard needs to go. So finally today, the repair of the fleet was imperative. When they landed at Pegwell Bay, there was a big storm. Lots of the ships were damaged. You had 800 ships, for God's sake. What? It's what? I don't. Yeah. So the repair of the fleet was imperative. They were damaged, probably because there was so many of them. Always intended to return to France at the end of the fighting season, which was probably a month later. The army in Britain had no supplies or food for the winter. And if it was unable to return to the continent, it could have been surrounded and starved into submission by the Britons. It was already surrounded by water for a start. Nor were the legions left in France strong enough to prevent an uprising there by themselves and without their leader, Julius Caesar. The army worked for 10 days and nights to haul all the ships ashore and to build the defences. With this complete and the base strongly fortified, 800 ships were dragged up on dry land. Caesar left the original garrison and all the skilled workmen in the legions to repair the ship. While he led his troops back into Kent to restart the advance, the main army would only return to sail back to France once they had achieved victory, defeated all of Britain within a month, and the peace settlement that bound Britain to the Roman Empire over 2,000 years later. Archaeological traces of these historical events are now beginning to emerge from the ground. Now, one thing I'm going to mention, right, before we finish, right, we haven't mentioned Lloyd George tonight, but we also haven't mentioned Operation Sea Lord, right, which was the Germans' invasion plan for Britain, right? The German military academies would have actually been taught about Julius Caesar's invasions of Britain, right? And the German invasions of Britain were cancelled for lots of different reasons. And it was probably cancelled because it's if you're going to need 800 ships to take 20,000 men over to Britain, which is nonsense. The Germans required about 150,000 men in their first invasion of Britain. Where are they going to get the boats from? There's all of these problems. This would have been the archetypal message that the military educators were using for people who were going to plan the invasion of Britain in 1940. Hence, it didn't go ahead because some of this stuff that we're talking about that professional archaeologists believe is absolute crap. On that note, we're going to make some more sense of this next week, and you better join me next week. A bit more Julius Caesar, Caligula next week, and there's more fact in Caligula than meets the eye, and I have some evidence that I'm going to share with you next week, and I'm not going to tell you what it is. One person knows, but they're not with us tonight. So there we go, guys. What we're going to do is, Bill, I want you to shout, scream at me, and I want you to either agree, disagree, or hate me forever.
I agree with you. 800 ships is nonsense. They probably used only maybe as little as 10 because they were done on a shuttle service. Send over 3 ships with 500 men, land, secure the area, send word, send the ships back, the empties. We're now safe. Send the next 500 across. Bang, bang, bang. So that's what they did. Logic dictates that's. There's no other way they could have done it. Full stop.
Can I just jump in there? I don't know if you've got anything else to say, right? I didn't make this point last night, but obviously you've got the Spanish Armada and you've got the English Armada, right? So both the English and the Spanish Armada completely failed, right? But that's another story, right? But the Spanish Armada was campaigning basically into the winter months, which was a stupid thing to do, right? And they were going to collect the Spanish army in the lowlands to just take them over to Britain, and they couldn't manage it, right? And that wasn't thousands of ships, right? You know, the Spanish Armada, I think I worked out at about 120 odd vessels. And that had an army of close to 40,000 men, right? Which whether that was the full contingent or whatever, but there were thousands on board the Spanish Armada, right? And that was 120 ships, right? And that's the Romans had a lot less men. It just doesn't make sense. It really doesn't, Bill. It makes nonsense.
So with my theory, it probably would have taken a month to establish all the troops on Britannia's shores.
And then you're going back, apparently. That's what Julius Caesar told us.
Yeah. So no, we'll stick with Claudius, I'm afraid.
But you might be sticking with Caligula next week.
Okay, thanks, Carl.
But we're going to have no naughty images next week from the Caligula film, all right?
Oh, why not?
Oh, yeah, I'm going to bloody put some in. I am. Because Roger will be up for that. Right. Right. So before we do Henry, just in case Richard needs to go. Richard, do you want to say something?
He's muted again.
Richard.
He's gone to sleep.
By the way, they're doing a remake of the Caligula film, and they want to know if I want to be in it.
No.
Right. Yeah, very interesting.
What, me being in the film or the lecture? Anything else, Richard?
No. Look forward to next week.
Good. Are you staying with us while Henry says something now?
Yeah, I'll hang about.
I'll go on that, Richard. By the way, Richard, you're sounding really clear and wonderful now. So I don't know what happened earlier on. You're perfect.
Oh, I'm on my laptop. So.
You sound like a real gentleman. I don't know how you live in Barry, but that's life. Henry, would you want to say something?
I thought the North Africa thing was very good. I think there's a lot of mileage in that. The Roman Armada, I think there's a number. I completely agree with the perspective of actually trying to see the shoreline, because I reckon they probably only have about 12 nautical miles to view anyway.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of hogwash. Sunset, 4 a.m. I don't think so.
That was spotted last night as well. Basically, I think what happened was that
was there duty free?
I think what happened. I think somebody spotted this mistake last night, and they rummed it up to 12 hours. And that's where we get 12 hours from. I think it was. There was a mistake in that plan or the notes or something. Yeah, sunset at 4 a.m. Well, you might get that in
sunrise.
West.
Sorry,
sunrise. Yeah. You might get that in West Wales. I don't know.
Will you get up tomorrow and tell us?
No, I'm not going to get. I got some stuff to do tomorrow. We've got a new strimmer. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I got to do a bit of strimming on an archaeological site tomorrow. I'm looking forward to it. So, oh, by the way, the next Elysig pillar's coming, but it's going to be the one after that's going to be completely different because it's just going to be Roman stuff in it. It's going to be called Elysig pillar, the place to get Roman porn.
And you enjoyed my piece of literature that I sent you.
I will, and we'll definitely use that for next week, love. On that note, is anything else? Anyone want to say anything else before we go?
No.
Yes, good night.
Good night.
Good night, thank you, Carl. Thank you.
All right then, we love you lots, man. See you,
You
Bill,
then,
Richard, Henry,
Bye.
Bye-bye.
and Belanger, la route along La Plata Square. Try, guys. And Henry, right? Don't tell anyone what I get up to with my sheep because it might get me in big trouble.
Well, just don't put them in that film. That's
What? Yeah, my sheep. Look, right, it's perfectly normal, right, when I'm shearing my sheep to cuddle them, right, to nicely spend time doing it, right, and then to do their hooves, and then to, it's fine.
You just enjoy yourself. Right, I'll leave you to
You
it.
No. Hey, thanks for your continued support, Henry. I'll see you next week. Take care.
Adios.
Adios, amigo. Good to see you back. Take care. Bye. Bye-bye.
It's a temporary phase. I will be away again.
The phage, that was in Star Trek, you know. If you got the phage, you were going to die.
Yeah. Well, we've got to go to other places.
Yeah, don't get the phage.
But adios.
Adios. No, no, take care. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Okay, folks, we're gonna finish this up. I don't know if there was anybody on YouTube with us tonight. I think there may have been. Anyway, folks, thanks for joining us on YouTube as well, and Marilyn from the Wirral, and we'll call that a night now. So, what's Bill's still there, right? So let's see if there's anything in the chat box. Nothing there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Nothing there. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And nothing there. Number 7. No, diolch yn fawr i chi. Ymor i chyd. And we'll see you then. Nos da. No.